Have you ever heard someone claim to be an extrovert? Or have you yourself ever called yourself an introvert? Well, you're not. They're not. None of us are. I know it's a bit of a confusing concept, but that's why I made this video, is to explain it a bit better, because I think that what the general population understands with these terms, introvert and extrovert, and what they were initially intended to describe, they're not really the same anymore. I think there's been some sort of like definition drift with these things, which is common when these concepts, which have been around for now over 100 years, kind of just get passed around in non-intellectual circles and in the general public, and they get a little bit twisted from their original definitions. So I just wanted to talk about that a little bit today, give some education, some background, and help you guys understand this concept a little more, because it really is fundamentally shifted. Even introvert and extrovert being nouns is wrong. Like it wasn't, they were always adjectives, introverted, extraversion. So they were really never meant to be static noun signifiers or identity symbols, so much as a description of one's kind of way that they process the world externally and internally. But let's get into it. So introversion and extroversion, they both come from one guy, one of my favorite guys, Carl Jung. He wrote about this in his treatise on personality types, which came out in the 1920s, early 1920s. So think about that, over 100 years ago. Pretty cool. Now, Jung defined all sorts of things. I mean, he was a student of Freud and sort of surpassed Freud or iterated on a lot of Freud's ideas and made them more palatable. In my opinion, he made them more workable and less stuck in certain complexes. I think Jung was a great thinker, a great philosopher. He was a Swiss psychiatrist and went on to write and develop a ton of concepts that are still around today in psychology. If you've ever seen a shadow work journal, that's from him. He invented the concept of the shadow. And he basically saw the ego, or the sense of identity, as a collection of everything that we are and experience. So let's just go from his definitions. How does Jung define introversion and extroversion? Now, he didn't talk about these in terms of what can be seen from the outside necessarily. So here's a couple quotes from Jung that might illuminate kind of his perception of this concept that he created of introversion and extroversion. So what he says is, extroversion is the attitude of the mind turned outward. Introversion is the attitude of the mind that is turned inward. So this is not something you will necessarily see from the outside, though the internal is expressed in the external. So generally, you will see people that are more extroverted, spending more time with others, because it's a sort of orientation and a processing of the world that's other-oriented, or not even other, but externally oriented. So they process through engaging with stuff. They make sense of the world by talking about it. They, a lot of their base orientation of the world and its processes is externalized. So there's drawbacks, there's benefits of this. Really, Jung talked about these things in terms of complexes that arise when you are too much of one way or the other. So it's not that you can really even be an extrovert, but you have both of these inside of you. And if one overpowers the other and becomes predominant, that's where you sort of develop a complex. So if someone's valence is highly extroverted to the point where that it is totally predominating over their introverted side, then they will have some issues. Namely, they will struggle to exist in the quiet times when no one else is around, when they can't bounce their experience off of something else. So they'll struggle with solitude. They'll struggle with quiet and peace and not being around others, or in being in lowly stimulating environments, things like that. Whereas those people that are more introverted will have more of a richer internal experience. They will run things through the filter of their internal self, typically before they run them through the external filter. Essentially, it's really a filtering process of how they parse reality and which places that they sort of check the reality against first. And so a person that's more introverted might run through certain filters of rumination, internal processing. They might retreat from certain situations if they have something that they really want to process, where someone who's more extroverted might reach out and want to process that with others. The important thing is that you're not one or the other. They were never meant to be rigid, identity-based concepts that you just are an introvert or you are an extrovert. And actually, if you find yourself often describing yourself in this way, there's probably some work that needs to be done to really give some more power to the other side of you. You know, we all have both of these inside of us, but they can become, too powerful one way or another. In Jung's conception, both exist within you. You are, to put it in concrete terms, both an introvert and an extrovert. But even that is kind of missing the point. That's where I want to talk about the modernity aspect of this. What is our modern conception of this? And I will say it hasn't fully drifted. I think for a lot of people, they do see things in terms of the extrovert and the introvert. And that is limiting. For people that see it in very black and white terms, introverts and extroverts, and see the world in this divided sort of way, that is a problem. But that's not, I would say, the full conception of this in modernity. Modernity has brought forth a new term, which I think is a little bit silly and showcases their lack of understanding. But you may know of this because you may have heard the term ambivert or ambiversion. And this is really, I think, a failure of us to appreciate the complexity of Jung's theory. I think this is kind of part of what's been lost in the psychoanalytic tradition. Ironically, even though science has advanced in a lot of ways, I think our conception of the self and of psychology and human development has actually regressed. Back then, not that everyone was super into these concepts, but there was more of an appreciation that some of these things were happening underneath the surface. Psychoanalysis, while widely stigmatized, was also sort of accepted in the intellectual circles, in the artistic circles. And I'm not sure that's the case anymore. But that's a digression. To talk about this term of ambiversion, it puts it on a spectrum. So you have introversion way over here, extroversion way over here, ambiversion somewhere in the middle, and someone would fall somewhere along that spectrum. I get that. It's a more evolved definition, I guess, than just purely introverts and extroverts. But in a way, it kind of just introduces a third concept. So it is more expansive, but still limiting. And so what I really want to make clear with this video is that it's not about division. It's really not. It's not about finding yourself as an introvert or an extrovert or an ambivert. What it is that both exist within you. You have qualities of self that are introverted. You have qualities of self that are extroverted. You have some things you may process in an introverted way. You may have some things you process in an extroverted way. When you have interpersonal conflict, you may run that by friends first to make sense of it. But if you're struggling with an internal habit building thing or, doubts of yourself, you may process that internally all by yourself. For other people, it may be the opposite. It's really just if you find yourself pulled on too much by one side of yourself, or this valence, this introverted part of yourself or the extroverted part of yourself, to where you feel like you're not listening to the other side, or you're spending all of your time in one orientation, one point of processing, that is a problem, because what it really does is it actually kind of warps your reality. So hopefully that siren wasn't too loud and you were still able to hear part of me. But what I was saying, I think, was that you really do need to appreciate both and build up one when it's weak and tear down the other when it's too strong. This is really what we have to do all the time. When your ego gets too strong and it becomes too heavy on you, whether it's building you up too much or tearing you down too much, then you have to step outside of the ego. You have to take its power away. You have to go into nature. You have to do something for someone else, stepping out of your own ego. This is why I love Jung so much, is because he's often touted as a very Western thinker, but he wasn't. A lot of his writings pull from Eastern philosophy. He really is sort of a Taoist thinker, and that's why I love him so much. He saw things as a dialectic. And this is really I think what are the two big errors in the modern conception of this extroversion and introversion that I think is sort of misunderstood. So here are the two main errors. First is the position. And I talked about this a little bit, but that's where are we starting with this positioning? In Jung, he starts it from the person and how they process the world around them. So it starts within, and what determines which one has more power over you is how you process the world. Our modern conception kind of takes it from the outside. And so you can tell someone's an extrovert if they spend more time with people, or you can tell someone's an introvert if they spend more time alone. But like extroverted people can suffer from social anxiety and still not spend much time around other people. And actually, that's a huge issue. Like that would be a very serious problem for them, because their anxiety is actually preventing that side of their personality that wants to be quite powerful, or at least wants to guide them in some way. The social anxiety is like a blanket on that. And so another layer that comes with people that are a bit extroverted and struggle with social anxiety is that they don't feel like themselves, because there's a piece of themselves that's being denied through that experience of anxiety. Or people that are more introverted that struggle to get a moment of peace or a moment of silence. I tended more towards the introversion side when I was younger. That was a stronger valence. I've now counterbalanced, thankfully. But then I came up in a family of 6. And so there wasn't a ton of silent, peaceful time. And that struggled. And I struggled with that sometimes. I had to make that time for myself. And thankfully, I was able to. Enough, at least, to stop it from becoming a real problem where I was denying too much of myself. And eventually, then it became the other way. I was letting the introversion become too powerful and not doing enough processing in the outer world. And then I became depressed because my vision narrowed so much on myself. And really, like, personality undergirds the development of your, what would, eventually become like a mental illness if you have one, is that if you have a way of processing the world that is powerfully one direction, and you end up with these complexes or these barriers, these skill issues, these sort of things that stop you from expressing the other side of yourself, then you can develop a complex where you become too much one side and you end up denying parts of yourself. And when we deny parts of ourselves rather than accept and integrate, that was Jung's whole thing. Even with the shadow, the hard parts about ourselves, the things about ourselves that we fear or that we hate or that we worry about, you still have to integrate and accept those. So Jung's not about you just label yourself as an introvert and then you go about your day and you never talk to anyone. Or you label yourself as an extrovert and you'll never process anything alone in your quiet time. Like, that's not it. These concepts of personality were extremities. They were a way of processing that can become too strong if you're not counterbalancing it with the other way. So I do kind of like the idea of ambiversion, but again, I think it's really missing the full scope of this, which is that it's not an either or. You have both. That's the other big error, I think, is there's developed this sort of like exclusionary dialectic, which doesn't make sense because that's not how the dialectic works, but where you are one and you're not the other, or when you're expressing one, you're not expressing the other. And I don't like this. I think that it puts it detracts from the real like core Taoist concept of this personality process, is that you are both. Both exist within you. And if you feel like one is kind of rising up, it's probably because you're allowing the other to be silenced. And what Jung would say is that one predominates your conscious life or your conscious processes. And then what happens when we deny the other is that will rule your unconscious. So a lot of times people will have these issues where it seems like they don't know where it came from, or there's a lot of tension that they can't really access. And part of that could be there is a valence of your personality or a valence of your way of processing that you are silencing, that you're not integrating, that you've kept sort of excised or ostracized in your psyche, and it remains in a box over there. And the fact that it's there, but you're not accessing it, kind of leaves this anxiety on the mind that something's wrong, or there's, a threat detection essentially on your identity or your sense of calm, your basic nervous system, things like that. So I didn't make this video to say like, you guys are wrong, you don't understand. Although maybe at times it came off like that. Sorry if it did. But I wanted to kind of express this as someone who's read from the guy who wrote these terms, that there's been a little bit of a like decay in our understanding of these words over time. And so I kind of wanted to just make this video to kind of put it out there and say we are talking about introversion and extroversion a little bit wrong in this culture. And I think if we shifted that a little bit, we would have some more self-awareness, some more insight, and we can grow from that more rather than kind of really restricting ourselves in these rigid categories. Anytime in mental health when we find ourselves stuck in categories, it's going to be restrictive. It's going to be reductive. It's going to make you feel less free to express and explore and be yourself in the multitude of ways that you can be, because you are not one thing. You're a million things, a billion things, all wrapped into one. And you kind of have to appreciate all dynamics, all angles of that kaleidoscope of you to really live out who you are and feel calm and peaceful and true to yourself, or whoever you are in that moment at least. I hope this was helpful for you guys. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. If there's anything that didn't make sense or I need to expand on a little bit, I can do that. So just let me know. I appreciate it.